Let's talk to you about Black Lives Matter. Protest planned in Sydney on Tuesday. Now, the court has been very clear and has sided with police, which of course in part were acting on the behalf of the New South Wales government, acting on the behalf of common sense, which is that we want to keep the gatherings to a minimum. You want the social distancing if they're involved, pretty difficult to do, and they have displayed in their multiple protests before that that's not going to happen. But of course, apparently the cause is some sort of high-vis vest against the virus. But here's what's interesting. We have had the court make a decision. The people are saying that are part of this protest saying they're going to ignore it. They're going to try to negotiate with police, but they say that they don't really recognise the legal system that has decided that they are not going to be able to protest. So put simply, if we see a protest on Tuesday, how does anyone in New South Wales not get the message that the law doesn't apply equally to people?
Yeah, look, Paul, the best we can hope out of this situation is that the drastic double standards on display here are red-pilling people left and right. In terms of what applies to mainstream Aussies, all the sacrifices that are being made are not being made by these guys and for some reason are going unpunished. We saw this last month. On the 5th of June, the Supreme Court made exactly the same call. No, the Black Lives Matter rally can't go ahead. The following day, it went ahead anyway. It didn't matter that the Court of Appeal threw out the Supreme Court's ruling anyway. The rally was already well underway. What people need to understand is that these guys are anarchists. It doesn't matter what the police say. It doesn't matter what court says what. They're going to march, not because Black Lives Matter, because we all know none of these rallies have improved the life of a single Indigenous Aussie. This is about disruption. This is a Marxist movement that will stop at nothing to drive division, the racial divide, etc., and so on. They are mirroring what's happening in the States, and it is absolutely alarming.
Yeah, I mean, Senator Patterson, so you can see what they partially want, which is they want a confrontation with police, because if they can have confrontation with police, then that, of course, will fuel a future protest, all the rest of it. But at what point do the police, who have been given a clear court order, enforce the damn court order?
Well, the rule of law applies to everyone, Paul. There's no exemptions, there's no exceptions. It doesn't matter how virtuous you think your cause is. It doesn't matter how fueled with self-righteousness you are. The law applies to you just as it applies to everyone else. And it's really problematic when the police or politicians or anyone else suggest that the law should not fall evenly, that some people will be punished for going outside and gathering and others won't be. That if you're fishing on a pier in Mornington, as someone was in Victoria, you're going to get a fine. If you're taking your daughter it was an L platter for a test drive, you're going to get a fine. But if you're gathering with 3,000 of your closest mates on the steps of the Parliament House here in Melbourne, no worries, we'll overlook that. That sends a shocking signal to all Victorians and all Australians that these laws are not going to be applied equally, so therefore why should you bother living consistently with them as well? And I think that's what happened here in Melbourne after the Black Lives Matter protest. I think it did relax people's restrictions, and I think that's caused for problems.
Well, and also, I mean, James McGrath, in part, it's what people saw in Queensland. They saw that there was the border that was closed between New South Wales and Queensland. They saw that there were rules about whether you could do this and couldn't do that, but people were able to gather in their tens of thousands in the middle of Brisbane. That's also the flow-on effect here, which is that if the law doesn't apply, then people start to think, well, hang on. And we're at a moment right now where I think we've got to be incredibly careful here, because the idiots who are sort of protesting about the masks and all the rest, and we'll have a proper talk about that later, they are going to end up giving cover to governments to justify more and more aggressive ways of policing this. Conversely, if people are able to gather freely and protest in a bigger crowd than would be able to go to the football or a restaurant or a funeral or a wedding, where, of course, if you, the rules were put in place just this weekend in Brisbane. I remember literally I was at the casino the other night. That won't surprise anyone. At the stroke of midnight, everyone was told they had to sit down because the COVID rules had changed. Now, if that's what's happening to the rest of the population, then surely a protest ruled illegal by a court must be enforced to be illegal.
Totally. And what people are really disappointed with in terms of these protest organisers is taking along in terms of what Liz said, these people are selfish ingrates. They're putting themselves ahead of the rest of us across Australia, people have given up their freedoms, the freedom of labour, the freedom of capital, our own freedoms in terms of speech and protest, if we wish, for the common good. But this mob think they're better than us, and the hypocrisy of certain governments in terms of not applying the rules consistently. Here in Queensland, as you said, Paul, we've got pubs who have been fined $6,000, yet 30,000 protesters can have a good old jamboree in King George Square and get away scot-free. It sends the wrong message to people. We are all in this together, except if you think you're more important than us because you're a protest organiser.